So just to your comment about still would qualify, when you would have qualified for positions ahead, you being out of that world for a while, what do you think the difference is now between who?
You're allowed to smoke marijuana.
But beyond that, like,
But this is very important.
that's the main point.
What are your priorities?
Is that the main
The
point?
FBI wants to be nice to you guys. I mean, I think that's an extraordinary cultural evolution for the FBI. But go on.
Doesn't it seem like there's maybe more to it about why or who they recruit now versus before?
Well, you know, I did a tour in the Office of Information Technology at CIA, and I'm glad you've asked the question because the qualifications have been changing. When we went nuts on counterterrorism, we were giving away GS-15 positions to guys whose only qualification was that they spoke fluent Arabic, with no college degrees and no real-world experience except for this and that. And so the system has a huge problem. First off, 70% of the secret world's money is spent on contractors. And one of the problems that we have with contractors is that they win contracts based on lies and then they field unqualified people. And that really hoses the system. Now, the other problem we have is that within the government, we've forgotten how to write a statement of work. And we've forgotten how to write a technical evaluation plan. And so we end up letting the contractors write the statement of work and the technical evaluation plan. And of course, the contractors, and I've said this before, they're going to write a plan which says you need more of what we can't sell to anyone else, okay? And the government says, yeah, sounds good. I'll get promoted because it means I'm spending more money and I've got more positions under oversight and so forth. Now, coming back to qualifications, I opened this conference in 1994. I was the first speaker. And not because I was important, but because Win Schwartau told Emmanuel I looked good in a suit with sunglasses. And so I was up we were, I think, in a downstairs room, and sunglasses and spotlights and Jello Biafra, and I swear to God, we had no idea that in talking about George Orwell there, we were scratching barely 10% of what we have today. We had no idea how bad it was going to get. But coming back to qualifications, and then I'll take your question. One of the problems with the entire system is that the schools are teaching old shit that's useless. And you guys are the lifeboat. And I'm sorry I don't have more younger people, although there's one here. You stand up. This guy is about to go to Penn State, and I was paying attention to him when he was 16 years old. Because he's got a huge brain. Dennis, what's your last name? Okay, please be nice to him, okay? Teach him shit, because I think he is all right. That's it. I'm sorry to embarrass you, but I think they need to know that you're here, okay? I mean, you guys are like my third generation of hackers. Two hackers ago, I had all the hackers with the babies in their arms, you know, and it was so cool. So we're coming over and over again. But on qualifications, one of the things that is really, really bad is the system is collapsing. And the system is collapsing because we're hiring people who are building more of the wrong shit more expensively. And you saw my technical thing from Robert Garrigue. And so I think it's taken me 25 years to appreciate the wisdom of Buckminster Fuller and Russell Ackoff. Fuller said, don't try and repair the system, displace it. And Russell Ackoff said, stop doing the wrong things righter and do the right thing instead. And so when I moved to open source everything, I mean, for me, that was a decisive shift. And I believe the time has come now for us to not accept proprietary software or hardware, period. And we need to move to a self-healing system that is an ecology that is affordable, interoperable, and sustainable, and that is geospatially rooted. In 1988, I told the General Defense Intelligence Program that if you don't have geospatial attributes on every single datum, you will never, ever get to machine speed processing. Okay, you have to have geospatial attributes, not just time and date groups. And it went in one ear and out the other. Keith Hall was two seats down from me, the NRO guy, good guy. All right, sir, ask me a question.
Well, essentially the question is, the whole paradigm is rigged, and we all know from 9/11 There's just, the whole thing is a lie. So when are the criminals, the Obamas, the Cheneys, the Bushes, the Clintons, all of them going to be taken down? Because
Well-
more and more, all we find is just, and what we're dealing with, we look at Tesla and we look at Buckminster Fuller and all these great, amazing scientists who have these great ideas.
And
what
we
they say-
criminalize those.
Yeah,
Yes.
we criminalize that because there is a criminal mafia. We have a criminal government that runs this world and the Federal Reserve, and we're all just trying to do little things. It's like trying to kill the cockroach, but you're throwing rocks, and the cockroach creates 215 new eggs every 10 days. You can't kill it. We need to just completely break out of the paradigm. So my question is, when do we say, F this world, start the new world, and get rid of the criminals? Because that's what's killing us.
Well,
Thank you.
All right. Number one, in revolutions, you have preconditions and precipitants. And we've got all the preconditions. And Matt Taibbi's book, Griftopia, is a great book. And if I mention a book, I've reviewed it. And if I've reviewed it, I've written a summary of it, so you don't have to buy the book. Just go find my summary and read it. And there's a quote on page 32, which talks about how over the last decade or so, Wall Street and government have become a blended criminal co-conspiracy. I mean, Rubin and Clinton have done more damage to this country than George Bush has, because they basically empowered the Wall Street mafia to take down the U.S. government, I mean, the U.S. economy, the Greek economy, the Spanish economy, so forth. And in all of this time, only Iceland has had the intelligence and the integrity to recover from this by immediately prosecuting the criminals and going after them. Now, there's a truth and reconciliation aspect to my being. I mean, first off, these people have an awful lot of power right now. But the day is going to come when I think we'll have a general strike. I mean, Occupy was a huge disappointment to me. I mean, I've never liked Kumbaya circles to begin with, but Kumbaya circles with wiggly fingers is just too much for me. And Occupy had a chance to take electoral reform, which is the one thing everybody can agree on. I ran for president in 2012 just for 6 weeks. I was unemployed. It seemed like a good thing to do. And I actually put together a website, bigbatusa.org, where I put the best ideas from everybody together, including an automated payment transaction tax and electoral reform. And the reason I ran for president was primarily so that I could, as a presidential candidate, registered with the FCC or whatever they're called, I could write to all the other presidential candidates, including Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. And I have to tell you, I'm ashamed of every single one of them. The only one that actually engaged in dialogue was Rocky Anderson. All the others are in their own ego trip. All the others are on their own narrow little path for being top libertarian or top green or whatever. Not a single one of them wanted to come together to create a national coalition for electoral reform, which is the one thing that we could absolutely make happen if we occupied the home offices of every senator and every representative, and we basically made it clear that until they passed the 11-point Electoral Reform Act, they were toast. So we're waiting for a precipitant, like our Tunisian fruit seller, all right? And the reason I've mentioned pedophilia is because obviously 9/11 wasn't enough. I mean, the whole, well, not the whole world, the 20% of the world that pays attention knows that 9/11, we got warnings from 13 countries in advance. Well, yeah, no, you don't have to poke him, it's okay. Look, at Phi Beta Iota, how many of you know that there's a PhiBetaIota.net? Okay, wow, I've got a blog called PhiBetaIota.net, the public intelligence blog. You can subscribe to it for free. We used to post 15 items a day, now we post three to four. And if you look there for Mini-Me Convergence 9/11, you'll get the best summary I was able to get from Richard Gage and other people, and key points of contention. I mean, it's never been investigated properly. It's just like the Warren Commission on JFK. What we have here, are you smiling? Yeah, okay. She reached over and went, boom. So, I think what's going to happen is we're going to opt out. And there are going to be more and more nullifications by states. And for example, New York State has essentially nullified fracking, town by town. That is a wonderful accomplishment, okay? And I'm afraid that they're going to get overruled by the appeals court, but that's what it should be. That's what it should be. It should be a bottom-up opt-out of the system. And the reason I think there are states that are going to secede is because the federal government has become criminally insane and ineffective. Good people trapped in a bad system. If I had to do my life over again, I'd probably move to Maine or Vermont and start one town at a time. But I've got another 20 years in me, and in fact, I was just asked to design an open source everything hub for London. And God willing, that may keep me busy for the next 20 years. And my intent is to actually create an open source everything hub that gives away this open source for everything, including there's a really cool open source car that they're asking $25,000 for, which is about the price of a good MGB from 1964. But I like the concept. And the whole open source construction village, I could move 1 million Somalis and give them housing, water, sewage, internet, power for $500 a person, okay? Because they're using dirt to make their own houses, and then they've got the compost distributed sewage, and they're capturing water, they're getting water with the solar. In Somalia, you've got lots of dirt, sun, and seawater. So there's some very clever things you can do. So short answer for me is I think we're going to see a resurgence of bottom-up, not in my neighborhood. And that'll be a good thing, and I hope it spreads like oil spots. And the other thing is, I want to really stress truth and reconciliation. There's no point in putting the Bush and Clinton and Obama families in jail. Even if we confiscate all their money, it doesn't do us any good. What we have to do is create infinite wealth. And there are a number of really good books on this point. Barry Carter wrote a book, Infinite Wealth. My friend Alvin Toffler has written both Power Shift and Revolutionary Wealth. You've got Yochai Benkler's Wealth of Networks. You've got Thomas Stewart on Wealth of Knowledge. Okay, we're at a point in which all this money that the Koch brothers has, the Koch brothers are making $3 million a year, $3 million an hour in compound interest. That's all fake. That's all because somebody said, I'm going to allow you to pretend to make $3 million an hour with this. Well, okay, and so where you end up going back is you end up repossessing the land and the spectrum. I don't believe in absentee landlords. I think villages and communities need to take back ownership. And in France, for example, you can lease land, and as long as you or a relative is resident on it, you own that land, but you're not allowed to harm that land. And so I think there's innovations that we can make, and I don't have all the answers, but I don't think the answer lies in burning them to the ground. I think the answer lies in creating peaceful, nonviolent alternatives where they end up having to come to us for food. So, another question. Yes, sir.
Firstly, I want to say I'm shocked at what you're saying right now in a very positive way.
What were you expecting me to say? I want to recruit all you assholes. I'll give you $1,000 a month to betray your neighborhood.
No, well, firstly, open source ecology was what you were referring to, the building your own village, open source ecology, and WikiSpeed is the car manufacturer that you were referring to, I believe. So those are you can check those out. Those are awesome. I wanted to know. I think I stand behind you 110% in building the positive solutions to change the world for the better. I completely agree that we needn't throw people in jail. If we can build the solutions, they'll come to us. We just need to work together, ground up all of that. And I'm doing that myself, open source, financing, and so on. But I wanted to know, so you're going to be starting to build an open source hub. If you had to, is there a way to choose one thing to start with? I find, because I only found out about you from the Guardian article that came out a couple months ago, and it was overwhelming. But it seems incredibly complete, which is wonderful. But I don't know, it's overwhelming.
Well, OpenBTS has always impressed me, and in fact, I'm writing, between attending sessions here, I've been writing the prospectus. It's at 33 pages now for this open source hub, and I'm looking at two different approaches. The first approach is to try and make the city of London a smart, sustainable city. Part of IBM's problem is there's no intelligence in IBM. Okay, there's no true cost economics in their smart city concept. Every one of your smartphones is putting 10 Chinese into a leukemia ward, okay, because every one of those smartphones is based on a class A carcinogenic. And so there are true costs in terms of water and all this other stuff. So a smart city actually has to understand the true costs of everything, and it has to move itself off the grid. And it has to get away from centralized power and centralized water and centralized sewage and all of these things. It has to become a perpetually learning city. And so working out of a university base with an industrial ecology, there's in the UK, there's an open source consortium. There's also an open source foundation. And even though London could be said by some to be the center of all evil, it's also a pretty cool place which has a direct petabyte channel to India. And I really see some enormous potential in using London as a stepping stone to getting India to become the first open source everything nation. I love India, and one of the things I like about India, it's the most fucking complicated country on the planet. This has 22 languages that are spoken by at least 1 million people each. Okay, and the diversity of everything. So for me, that's one starting point. The other starting point, I was very impressed by the project in Mexico, which is installing cellular for a $10,000 drop. I think that's the other starting point, is go into places that don't have cellular service and go with this open spectrum as land that cannot be owned. And once you have them on open BTS, then you get them on open. I mean, we still don't have, John Gage spoke at my first conference in 1992, and I tried to get him to understand that open office wasn't enough. There are 18 functionalities. If you look up Catalyst, computer-aided tools for the analysis of S&T, there are 18 functionalities that you need on an all-source analyst workstation. We still don't have them. I was a founding member of the Advanced Information Processing and Analysis Steering Group for the entire U.S. government, the entire U.S. intelligence community. And we did surveys, and we found that there were over 20 projects across the U.S. Intelligence community, sometimes 3 or 4, like NSA had at least 6. Okay, and each of the groups was building its own all-source Fusion workstation, but there was a CASI version, there was an SAIC version, there was an SRA version, there was an IBM version. And all of them were using proprietary crap, and they weren't really thinking through all of the details. So we need, beyond the cell phone, the simple cell phone, with time limits, we need an analytic workstation. And then we need the ability to share information. And we need the ability to bring in information. I mean, I love it that there are plants now with cell phones. And these plants will literally send a text message when they need water. This is really way cool. So we're getting to a point, and I think the starting point is OpenBTS and the mindset behind that. There's a lot of stuff that has impressed me this time around on values. Open source is a meme, it's a mindset, it's a value system. And it's the value system that has to replace the existing system, which is about fencing in the commons and criminalizing what used to be the rights of man. So that's my answer. One is start at a city level, and the other is start at bottom up with a $10,000 unit.
Cool.
And move there.
Thanks. And just very quickly, so the project that I want to do is to have a currency that's only generated when the community that's using it believes that what is being created is of value. So educational purposes, planting urban agriculture, things like that. So if someone plants a garden, they pay them in this currency, and then that person can spend it in this community.
I think there's a lot to be said for time energy-based currency, and there's a lot to be said for local spending. There's a lot to be said for not allowing value to be extracted from a community. But I'm not smart enough to understand all these currencies.
Okay, and just sorry, last I asked on P2P. It's a group on Facebook and just everywhere P2P.
Okay.
Someone asked they wanted to know what your thoughts were on cryptocurrencies.
Before I answer that, let me just say that we may not even last an hour, because I sense today's been an exhausting day, and with Ellsberg and Snowden at the highlight, some of you may want to go sleep, and that's fine. So don't hesitate to go over and raid the book pile if you decide to leave early. I'm fine with that. I am not taking those books back with me. And if you're an entrepreneur and you want to grab 5 to 10 of them and sell them to someone else, please do, and just remember your guilt. Okay, Earth Intelligence Network at PayPal. I'm thinking about doing a PhD if I get a job and I can afford it. And one of the things that's really, yeah, I know. I mean, Herman Daly told me I was an idiot. I mean, why do that? Why subject you to the abuse of lesser minds as you go through it? But I'm titillated because I've actually invented a completely new PhD that takes political science to a new level. Imagine if political science were actually about community-based, ethical, evidence-based decision-making. And one of the things I've learned in looking into the PhD is that the course on political economy really matters, and that Marxism has never really been properly understood in terms of some of its analytics. For me, cryptocurrencies are nothing more than a way of expressing value, and it's a way of expressing how you want your political economy to operate. And so I'm not smart enough to understand cryptocurrencies, except I have understood that a lot of people have lost a lot of money by throwing away disk drives that had cryptocurrencies on them. So this is a small flaw in the system. So I don't have an opinion other than to say, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Okay, yes, sir.
I was just going to say first, you should call your new PhD political engineering.
Well, you know, I mean, that if you saw my open source everything slide, it's about engineering. It really is about engineering and sustained resilience, and the Earth is a closed system. So the whole idea of the new PhD is to demand that people learn how to do multidisciplinary analytics and holistic analytics, and true cost economics has to be embedded in everything. And they also have to learn how to do community-based decision-making, which is what the Native Americans knew. There's a great book, 1491, before Columbus arrived. The average Mayan man only had to work for, why don't we take a 5-minute break and everybody go get a book, and then I'll start talking again if anyone wants to talk to me. Great, thank you. Let me give you one. Oh, yeah, no, I'll give these to my 2 sons. Yeah. What is it? Oh, lock pickers. What do you do? Oh, no, I know that. And in fact, I brought one of my sons here a long time ago. Yeah, it's not something I do a lot of. I mean, but yeah, it is a good puzzle. It is a good puzzle. Oh, here, I have something for you. What's that? Oh, shit. Yeah, I think you and I have talked before. Yeah, there we go. All right, these are my old boots. Oh, thank you. I want to point out that this generous lady has just given me a $10 bill. Shame on all the rest of you. Guilt. Feel the guilt. Oh, bless you, sir. This is gas money. So thank you. Thank you. No, look, and you know, all my books are free online, and I love books, and I recommend you read them in hard copy so you can mark them up and stuff. But the book Intelligence for Earth, absolutely read it online. Thank you, sir, very much. Read it online because it has all the active links. Thank you, Dennis. God, this is great. I should do this more often. This is kind of like a cool thing. This is so much better than me sitting down on the mezzanine. Oh, thank you. Bless you, sir. Hold on. I remember you here. This is for the hat you gave me. Golden candle of truth seekers. So, oh man, look at this. Feel this guilt vibe, man. Bless all of you. Thank you so much. I really am grateful. There's something about unemployment that teaches you humility. Thank you very, very much. And if anyone wants my CIA badge number written in their book, thank you, sir. I would be glad to stay on and sign books with lewd and obscene messages in a minute. Yeah, hang on, okay. Thank you so much. God, I think we've discovered a new way of gifting. All right, I will do a dance. All right. Hey, guys, this is great. This is, I mean, it's a $250 trip up here, not counting the hotel. Thank you so much. All right, so give me a question, and thank you, and you can tuck money into my socks.
Yeah, I was
And,
going to say,
thanks.
this is New York City. I think you have to take your pants off now.
Hey, you do not want to go there. Short, fat, bald, and ugly. But
You know,
anyway.
there was a sex talk in here right before, so, you know, everybody.
Yes,
has their-
sex toys, and you know what? It went in one ear and out the other. I know, you're handsome, man. And by the way, bald people have more testosterone. All right, question, and thank you, all of you, for your generosity. I really appreciate it. And don't leave any books behind.
So my question
Thanks.
is, I guess this is my first Hope conference. And
Oh, man, you got to come back every time.
I was.
Thanks.
It's amazing, and there was a ton of great stuff, and you've talked about a lot of things too, but they're all, I think, understandably because of the people here, kind of bottom up types of things. You know, better tools and better ways for people to blow whistles and give us transparency and things like that.
Right, and not integrated.
And partly it's like, okay, there's a crisis of leadership or a leadership vacuum. And my question is, we're a tiny, tiny minority of the population, and most people want to roll into work at 9, leave at 5, flat screen TV, big barbecue grill, and
They've been trained that way.
Fox News. So my question is there a chance that you get some leadership, either at the highest levels of our political system or senior levels of our intelligence agencies or where all these problems, or is it just, because of the way the system is electorally and lobbyist-wise, just impossible? And then we need to focus our attentions back into what you talked about, which is really localized solutions to the values that we want to have and the systems that we want to create.
That's a wonderful question, which I will take 4 hours to answer.
Can we go back 8 hours?
No. We're not doing that anymore. I'm an old guy, but no, I will not stop as long as one of you has a question. But please don't stay late. First off, let's look at Iceland. Iceland did the right thing, and they now have one of the best economies on the planet. Integrity is a value in this day and age. One of the things that troubles me, and one of the reasons I am very excited about this open source everything hub, I'm very grateful to Nafiz Ahmed because I've been marginalized. My first 2 books had forwards written by senators who were chairman of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence. In 1994, people were talking about me as a future director of national intelligence. And then they figured out that meant we would do it faster, better, cheaper. And I lost them on the cheaper. Okay? So that was the end of me as an up-and-comer. And I survived for a while, but then I was asked in a verbal interview to declare all my foreign contacts. I declared all 7,500, and the chimpanzees went nuts. And even though a judge found in my favor and I now have my top secret restored, they basically put me out of business. They cost me $6 million. Because you lose your clearances, you lose your contracts, you lose your business, you lose everything. And so one of the things that's very exciting to me is I think we're on the verge of an integration across the opens. And that's what we've been missing, is everybody's in their narrow little open niche, open spectrum or open software, open hardware, but they're not putting it all together. And one of the things I look to is crisis mappers. I'm hugely impressed by everything that Jen and Patrick Meir have done and other volunteers. If you're not familiar with crisis mappers, take a look at it, because it uses open source geospatial. And then, like in Haiti, for example, all of the SMS messages in Creole and French to members of the Haitian diaspora across the United States then get translated with geospatial references to a volunteer network that then plots it on a map with triple redundancy. And you end up having, in 6 to 24 hours, better information than CIA could get in 100 years, okay? Because you're harnessing the people who are on the ground, and you're just doing all of this. So I think integrating open sources is the next big leap. And the reason that matters is because it's affordable, and it's interoperable, and it's scalable. I mean, we have reached the end of the era of lies. We have reached the end of the era in which all these, Google is shit, okay? Google hits less than 2% of what's on the web. And you see what someone else has paid for you to see. And all these other search companies, Yahoo is going through its own identity crisis. If anyone knows Melissa, I'd like to talk to her. But it's almost impossible to break through all these gatekeepers, because the problem with gatekeepers is they're absolutely certain they will lose their job if they let a new idea in. And so Yahoo has you guys know that Google started with stealing Yahoo's search engine, HP being stupid about closing Alta Vista, and CIA funding. Okay, so they had a trifecta on top of Larry's having a good idea about taking Eugene Garfield's citation analytics from the Institute of Scientific Information. So I'm babbling. Ask me a question.
So we're in New York State, which has more now, I think, restrictive firearms laws than in Canada. Talk to me about civilian firearms ownership in the future.
Well, open carry is one of the most important opens. And
I respect
and
that. Just
I-
as a
look,
follow-on.
what's
Not
that?
to cut you off, does a follow-on. Open carry is one thing, but concealed, I think, is more important. Just to add, but
You're right. Actually, I used to have a concealed permit, and the main reason I had it was to not worry soccer moms. Because you show up at a soccer game armed and dangerous, and they freak. We've trained a nation of sheep. I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe that one of the things we need to do is really focus on helping our police understand that they're supposed to be our police, and that the day that they're federalized, they are righteous targets. Okay. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I've learned many things so far tonight.
None of them before you walked into this room, or all of them after you walked in there. Yeah, never mind, that came out wrong. Go ahead.
I have a spy question.
Yes,
that I
a
hope
spy
is-
question. Good, I do spy questions. Yeah, I do spy questions.
This is unfortunately a very geeky and hacker-related technical spy
As it should
question.
be.
So, given that odds are pretty good that the NSA has somewhere between 20 and 40 years relative advanced knowledge in mathematics compared to the general mathematical community.
I wish Thomas Drake were here, but go on.
And given that it's general accepted practice throughout our government to approve the advanced encryption standard for encoding of highly classified documents, how likely do you feel that it is that the NSA or another governmental agency has the ability to break AES or compromise it in much better time than is publicly known?
Well, let me unpack that in a couple of ways. One is that you guys know how you can go to Best Buy and you can buy that thing where you plug your USB into the electrical circuit on one floor. You connect the router to the electrical circuit on one floor, and then on a second or third floor you can get it back out. Okay, the Chinese have been doing that to NSA for the last 10 years. That's why they want their own power stations. So don't assume NSA is as smart as you think. Number two, one of the things that worries me about Larry and Google is computational mathematics. Because I think I'm an idiot, okay? I mean, it's a real struggle for me to do 2 + 2. But one of the things that really troubles me is that algorithms and artificial intelligence are only as strong as your strongest idiot. And so when you do algorithms that have false conclusions and bad ideas, what you're actually doing is you're planting a cancer in the code. And we don't have a good review process for computational mathematics. And that's one of the things I think we need to do a lot more of. In fact, Dennis, I've encouraged to take a look at, computational mathematics and computer design and self-healing and all of this stuff. One of the things that stunned me, I guess I'm naive, but for IBM and Dell and Apple and all these other companies to actually agree to short-circuit their own computers for NSA, that essentially means that if you're a foreigner and you buy a computer made in the USA, you're a dumbass, okay? How could they do that? So NSA has been doing a lot of jury rigging of systems right at the factory. And last but not least, on encryption, I think it is possible to create encryption systems that can't be broken by NSA, but I'd much rather not be noticed. And that's why I've become a huge believer in anonymity. And I'm really, really concerned about the loss of anonymity. And in fact, one of the most beneficial things for me at this conference has been absorbing my realization that I've been focusing so hard on open source everything, I have forgotten about anonymity, identity, privacy, and rights. And so this afternoon, after I came back from dinner with Identity Lady, who I'm sorry to say is competing with me, but I like her very much, I wrote a new page into my proposal on those 4 things. And so I would say those 4 things need a lot of attention. And I guess my bottom line is NSA is smart, but I don't think it's that smart. And I would not overestimate their capacity. Now, what NSA does have is an extraordinary ability to intimidate the CEOs of US companies that should know better. Okay? Follow up?
No.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yes, sir.
I was just going to add on the encryption side. I spoke with Matt Blaze earlier, and he said.
Oh,
the
Matt
exact
Blaze
same
is
thing.
here?
Uh-huh.
God, he's an original.
And I was curious how you first got into intelligence.
Okay. I was an oil brat. I grew up overseas.
Oh, and would you do it again today?
Oh, yes, yes. Look, I recommend to all of you, if you can get in and get the marijuana waiver, you absolutely should work for intelligence, okay? It is, look, it's a lifetime experience. It is like being a Jesuit priest or a ninja warrior or whatever. I mean, it's really cool. And the fact that it's really fucked up and stupid has absolutely nothing to detract from the coolness value, okay? I mean, I'm powerful as an advocate for open source because I've done it all. I mean, I've done everything, including satellites and planting devices, audio devices close in. I've done it all. Stealing diplomatic pouches, planting bugs in ministers' offices. I mean, that's really cool stuff. Now, let me tell you, when you're debriefing a terrorist or when you're doing an audio op, you get 1 minute of useful information for every 4 hours of tape. I mean, people don't understand just how stupid NSA is. NSA processes less than 1% of what it collects. and Binny taught me this. NSA is about spending money on collection that they will store forever but never process, okay? Unless they want to fuck with you, in which case you're seriously screwed, okay? So that's why you want to be invisible, which I have not done well at. But I've lost my train of thought. Where were we?
Do it all.
Oh, yes, would I do it all again? Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know what? I consider it an honor to serve the U.S. government. And believe it or not, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in the Republic, and I'm really terrified about how fucked up my government has gotten. But I do believe in it, and I believe in the profession of intelligence.
How did you originally get into that? That's what
What's
I'm
that?
curious about how you originally got into it.
Okay.
Going back.
I grew up as the son of an oil engineer, 10 years in Latin America, 10 years in Asia, including 4 years in Vietnam as a kid. And I went and did my undergrad at Muhlenberg. Then I got a master's at Lehigh and decided I'd become overly academic and intellectual. And there was a Marine Corps recruiter who basically sucked me in, and he was right. I mean, I needed the Marine Corps. It was a balancing factor. It made me rough and ugly in some areas, and so it was a balancing factor. But then the Marine Corps was at peace, and it was boring, so the CIA had a little ad, and I was their dream candidate in a lot of ways. I mean, lived overseas all my life, had a master's degree in predicting revolution, spoke fluent Spanish. I could do very well, and I was a high performer. But it turned out that I wasn't their dream candidate because they changed the psychological profile for my class to self-starter entrepreneurial. And the old profile, which they went right back to, was little gray man who follows orders and doesn't create problems, okay? And so I was very lucky to get into CIA and to do the 9 years that I did, 3 back-to-back clandestine tours and 3 Washington tours. And I don't regret a minute of it. It was a life-changing experience, and I think, you know, it's one of those areas. I also recommend you join the military, and consider, you know, the Coast Guard. You get to kill people and wear boat shoes, or the Air Force. You have air conditioning everywhere you go, you know. So I do believe in the military. I believe in the universal draft. And they haven't gotten to a beard exception yet. And in fact, the Special Forces guys that went into Afghanistan, I was there at Special Forces headquarters when the idiot general told them to shave. He was a leg. I mean, he was a straight guy, and he didn't get it. But now, of course, everybody sports a big beard, and it's you know, the American Taliban is alive and well in Afghanistan. All right, David. This is the president of the New York Internet Society who hosted me at Liberation Technology Conference.
Because I'm working on a related project too. This is a very open-ended question, the role of games and simulations in education and activism.
Ah, wonderful. The role of games and simulation. Now, Medard Gabel, as I've mentioned, is someone I really respect. One of the problems I have with serious games is that they're all little stovepipes. And I asked Medard one day, why can't we get all these serious games to share data and to actually become useful? So you have a water game and a health game and, you know, all different kinds of games. And he said it's like trying to play all the sports on the same field at the same time. You have to design from the bottom up. Now, that's what I funded when I had money. And Medard Gabel, you can look him up online, Big Picture Little World or something like that. Medard is ready to build the digital Earth game. I paid to have that trademarked in his name. And so I believe that serious games are the way we get to direct democracy. I believe that serious games are the way we get to connecting every mind to all information relevant to any decision anywhere in the world. And if you're a member of the Pakistani diaspora, you should be able to vote on issues back home as well as issues here. And in fact, you should be able to vote on the sanitation arrangements in the Frankfurt airport, okay, if that's part of your world. So I believe serious games are absolutely going to be the main interface for connecting minds with information, with voting, with decisions. but they're not there yet, which is why I no longer go to serious game conferences.
Oh, okay. So with that one project, how much development was done with that, the one you mentioned?
$15,000. He needs 5 million. If I were to get my 100 million, he would get the first 5.
Uh-huh, okay. Right, okay, so bear with me here. Is there any kind of source code that could be used for other projects that's far along enough? For
That I would ask him about, but I don't think he's a coder. He's more of a designer. And I would love to see this group have a track on games next year, but not, it has to be an integrated track. It has to be an integral consciousness track. It has to be, how do we pull all this together, and how do we make the open data work with multiple things, and how do we do crowdsourcing so we get to feedback loops? So how can we calculate where the best use of an ounce of water is? Because we're wasting a lot of water in different decisions that we make, and these decisions are made in complete isolation from one another. I think we're on the verge of a major mind-expanding breakout sometime in the next 5 or 10 years.
No. Now I'll just plug my own project here, but I'm working with, at LiveTech we had a presentation about this, on a mobile and online game to promote activism, where you would get points and prizes for doing different things and hooking into educational resources to that. Our first, you won't be surprised to hear this, our first iteration is going to be focused specifically on internet governance and policy, but it will be open source and move to a...
But they can look it up at the Internet Society.
Yeah, right. And it will become a more of a general purpose platform that can be adapted to other things. So.
Part of the problem with activists is they're stovepiped. I was sitting in with CEOs.
I agree about that. Okay.
Yeah, I know. And I was sitting in with a bunch of CEOs that Joseph McCormick had brought together from Transpartisanship. And halfway through the meeting, I realized that these CEOs were all comfortable with the two-party tyranny, because they knew that when their party was in power, they would get lots of money, and when their party was out of power, they would get half as much, but it was kind of a calculated thing. They were terrified of the idea of a Congress that finally said, fuck you, we're not going to give you all these handouts. Okay? So the activists, in my view, have been rotten at working together. They've been rotten at sharing information. And I mean, I love John Perry Barlow, and I respect Mitch Kapor in a manly way. Well, no, wait a minute. I don't think I want to go there. Anyway, I think John Perry's a cat's whiskers. And EFF has done a lot of good, but I think EFS has lost it. They're not serious. So who do you look to leadership? So, David, can we let someone else in? Okay, thank you.
Yes, Robert. I recall you mentioning that you ran in the 2012 election to gather.
Wait, say that again?
I recall that you mentioned that you ran in the 2012 election to gather information on the other candidates.
For 6 weeks, not to gather information on the other candidates, to get them to read my letter.
Yeah. Well,
the short answer is I think a third of them read it. Only one of them answered, Rocky Anderson. I let Greg Johnson drive my MGB when I went up to New Hampshire with him. And Greg's a good guy. But the bottom line is not a single one of these, Jill Stein, none of them was willing to contemplate the one thing that could bring us all together. They were all focused on, I want to be president of this small party, whether I win or lose.
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul, I think, is controlled opposition. I think Ron Paul is there to keep the libertarians down. I mean, I'll tell you what, I think Ron Paul won a lot of the primaries, and they were stolen from him. Yes, and I think that had Ron Paul been willing to reach out to Dennis Kucinich and create a coalition cabinet, which is what I explicitly suggested. I wanted to have a green, I actually, if you go to bigbatusa.org, I have a named coalition cabinet. Balanced budget, end all taxes. The APT tax was created by someone smarter than me, but it taxes currency and transaction. It basically blows up the pie from which you take a tiny fraction. And so Ron Paul could have been president. Colin Powell could have been president if he didn't have a crazy wife who has made him promise not to be president, and if he had challenged Dick Cheney. Okay? Colin Powell would be a great president, but he let Dick Cheney get away with murder. So Ron Paul, for me, is a huge disappointment. Rand Paul actually seems cleverer than his father.
I was just gonna ask you about Rand Paul. I mean, he seems like a failure to me. Do you think he can actually?
No, look, we can have another discussion on Rand Paul. Let me come back to Dennis. And then if you want, get in line and we'll have another question. Go on, Dennis, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. My other part of my question was going to be, like in the upcoming election, with the two-party tyranny in place, what can we do to educate ourselves so we don't elect another Obama?
Look, you're fucked with the two parties,
Oh.
okay? There's absolutely no point in voting for anybody that is a Democrat or a Republican. And unfortunately, they have the power. Look, one of the cool things about briefing Occupy and electoral reform, there's a little video. If you go to YouTube and you look up Steal Occupy election, you'll get right to it. It's a 6-minute video that went to the front page of Reddit. Huh? No. I want you to go look for it, because then we'll spend 6 minutes watching me in history. When I did that, and then when I posted this thing, people came out of the woodwork. I heard from everybody around the country who had any kind of stake in electoral reform. And as a result, there's now an Electoral Reform Act with 11 points that represents the best thinking in this country on how to restore the integrity of our electoral process and the integrity of our governance, okay? And what it boils down to is Congress has the power to pass a law that says that every one of the 6 accredited parties, I had to actually run for president to learn that there are 6 accredited parties beyond the Democratic and Republican Party. They're Constitution, Green, Libertarian, and Reform are active, and the Natural Law and Socialist are inactive, okay? But Congress has the power to pass a law, and such a law has been introduced 9 times, the last 4 by Ron Paul, that demands that every state ballot allow anybody on that ballot for any federal office. And Congress will not pass that law because they like being a two-party tyranny, all right? My bottom line is I think we need some kind of precipitant that reactivates Occupy, but with discipline and a brain. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but I honestly believe that we're this close to taking the power back. You know, I watched a movie once called A Day Without Mexicans, and it was a great, great movie. But imagine a day without us. I mean, imagine a general strike in this country. Imagine a nonviolent general strike in which we occupy all of the state legislatures, all of the state governors' offices, all of the state representatives, I mean the senators and representatives, we occupy them. And we say, look, this is real simple. We're not leaving until you pass the Electoral Reform Act. I think we would get it. But we lack that cohesion, and we lack that ability to focus on one thing. And that's what I'm good at, is getting to that one thing. But I suck at getting Occupy to pay attention. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for those answers. One more thing. Any way we could put open source into helping our elections become, like, being able to implement
There's some good things happening in terms of money. I mean, in prior hacker conferences, I've encouraged hackers and gnome decks to attach themselves to corporations and candidates like leeches. I mean, I have this vision of 550 naked congressmen where there's nothing that they do. I mean, take their schedule, okay? Wouldn't it be interesting if every minute of their day were accounted for in public? Wouldn't it be interesting if we made it easy for subversive staffers to post their schedule? If we made it easy to actually track all their money? I mean, there are a lot of documents, and you can crowdsource the effort of watching the documents and so forth. And But again, money and stuff like that, that's a detail. One of the things that I don't agree with Lawrence Lessig about is he's big on corruption and getting money out of politics, but it makes no difference. If you get money out of politics and you can't get ballot access, it makes no difference. It's a whole, okay?
Thanks for all the answers.
Hi, Mr. Seal.
Robert.
Robert, in your opinion, how far away is the U.S. military from a fully automated fighting force, and what do you think the long-term consequences will be?
Well, in 1994, I was asked by the National Research Council to review the U.S. Army's $6 billion communications plan. And the first thing I said was, you guys are assuming that all of your bits are going to be self-generated, and you've made no provision for talking to or listening to anyone outside of the U.S. Army. That hasn't changed, okay? So number one, they're out of touch with the world. Number two, none of their systems are interoperable. I mean, you have obviously some shared data sharing and stuff, but have you ever seen the Pentagon spaghetti chart? There's a fantastic Pentagon spaghetti chart, and it's all of the little, you know, I mean, if you think about controlling air and artillery and ground forces, and now you have drones. I mean, in Afghanistan, we have real spectrum issues, okay? The Soviets have always been 10 or 15 times tougher than we are on electromagnetic spectrum deconfliction and control, and we don't do that. In fact, we don't even worry. We knew 15 years ago that the drone downlinks could be intercepted, but nobody gave a shit, okay? So I'm not really impressed. I mean, think of Army automation as the F-35 in code, okay? Now, think of the Army automation as the F-35 on code and someone just spilled Gatorade on it. Does that answer your question? I mean, that's my personal opinion.
It does. So I take it you don't think much of all the money that DARPA's put into developing an autonomous machine intelligence.
I love the robotic dog. Actually, the best thing in life for me has been my teenager wanted a dog, and my wife, who was a cat lady, allowed him to have one. And so now I walk once a day, 2 cigars, 1 cigar out, 1 cigar back. And it's great. It's absolutely great. I love the dog. He's gotten me away from my computer for an hour a day. So look, I mean, I wrote a letter to Chuck Hagel recently. And one of the problems that we have, there are 4 levels of analysis in any area: strategic, policy, acquisition, and tactical, okay? The Department of Defense doesn't have a strategy. Its policies are insane. Pivot to Asia, for example. I mean, these are policies that are thought up by some bimbo who's sleeping with the president, okay? And then they kind of take on a life of their own. And acquisition is hosed. The Navy can't build a ship. The Air Force can't build an airplane. The Army hasn't figured out that the average bridge loading distance around the world is 30 tons. And oh, by the way, intervisibility, line of sight distance, is under 1,000 meters, which means the M1A1 is worth what we pay for it in exactly 6 countries. The average aviation day is hot and humid. The average aviation day for the Navy and the Air Force is warm and not humid, which means that these pieces of crap that we're building fly half as far and loiter half as long and can carry half as much as they should be, okay? So I wrote the Secretary of Defense a letter which said, look, if you let General Flynn do his job, we can cut the budget by 30%, we can create a 450-ship Navy. The Navy now has as many admirals as it has ships. I kid you not. 283, okay? I'm serious. And the reason is because of the inflation in Washington. I was the 2nd ranking civilian in Marine Corps intelligence in 1993, and I was a GS-14. Today they have like 10 SESs, and they haven't grown, okay? I mean, it's just the whole rank inflation thing is insane. What was your question again?
It was about automation of the U.S.
I have
military
reverse
fighting
ADD.
force. So,
What-
so following up on what you just said,
Yeah.
do you think some other country is in position to overtake the U.S. in that respect?
I wouldn't want to overtake the U.S. on anything. I mean, certainly the Department of Defense, and it's not just the Department of Defense. One of the problems we have is we can't keep the rest of the government honest. I mean, CIA and State Department have hosed Afghanistan in a number of different ways. There's a guy named Gunny Poole who's written a number of books on the Eastern way of war and stuff like this. Okay, the answer to American technology power is a half-naked Asian who's really good at moving 50 meters without being caught. Okay, and that's what they did to us in Vietnam. Over the Tunnels of Cu Chi is one of the greatest books ever written. Do not underestimate other people. We tend to substitute technology for thinking. We tend to throw money at a problem rather than intelligence. And as a result, the U.S. military is a hollow military that is stretched too thin. And oh, by the way, the infantry is 4% of the force, takes 80% of the casualties, and gets 1% of the Pentagon budget. That's criminal. All right? So I think the U.S. military is a hanger queen. Okay? Have a nice day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir. Send Hillary.
So I'm really interested in some of your philosophy of like revolution and how that happens, and I'm also kind of interested in how that matches up with kind of the current plan or maybe shift for how the U.S. conducts militarization, being like training foreign militias, drones, as you were talking about, even like an increase in maybe the looking to autonomous weapons. I guess what I'm wondering is, like, I was in Colombia recently, and learning some of that history and how like the FARC starts out as like a group of campesinos trying to like defend their own land, do it peacefully. They're eventually attacked, maybe not directly by a military, but by a paramilitary, somebody being funded by a government or something like that. And then it gets violent. And I know you talked about like nonviolent revolution and occupying space, but I guess what I'm wondering is, like, does that get violent at some point? And then, you know, how do you carry out a revolution without becoming an oppressor like yourself? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an important convoluted question. And
Yeah, sorry.
that's okay, because I have an important convoluted mind. First off, the U.S. has no fucking business intervening all over the world. That's that we went wrong with Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, it's just astonishing to me that the U.S. public actually believes all this bullshit. You know, it's not just the 935 lies. It's over 1,000 military bases overseas with all of the rapes that those come with, and traffic accidents and everything else. And that's money that's being spent overseas that should be spent here at home. So number one, I think the U.S., and this is where, I mean, I don't misunderstand me. I think Ron Paul is 80% absolute wonderful and 20% toxic. And it's that 20% toxic that kills me, or that kills all of us. He's a great man who, like Colin Powell, sold out to the system. And that's too bad. And I really was very impressed by Ellsberg today. He really forced the issue of what is our responsibility. And one of the things that I'm thinking about now is, how do we make it possible for whistleblowers to really do whistleblowing with absolute security? And one of the obvious answers is a brown envelope, you know, mailed someplace, but it has to avoid the mail cover, and that's the problem. So maybe it's going to end up being Starbucks is the covert People's Revolutionary Exchange, you know. You drop in, you say, I want a cinnamon bun with toasty what's-this, and they'll say, okay, here's the flash drive, you know. And so there's just a real opportunity here. Violence, you know, the Earth Intelligence Network SEAL has a stiletto in it, because there are inevitably assholes that have to be killed, but one at a time, one stiletto at a time, okay? bombing the shit out of a village in order to get someone that Muhammad told you was a terrorist, but the real truth is that Muhammad owes this guy $60,000. Okay, so killing him is actually getting rid of that debt. This goes back Vietnam. We do this every single place we go. The first people we kill are the guys that owe money or that are owed money, because we, like Somalia, we talked to the English teachers because they spoke English, and they ended up being able to sell the death of people, the highest bidder. You give me $10,000 and I will get the Americans to kill the guy that you owe money to. Do not underestimate the stupidity of the U.S. system, all right? But as a general rule, I have absolutely come to believe in nonviolence. I just think it's a time-energy equation. And I think nonviolence is absolutely the way to go because violence inevitably destroys infrastructure, it destroys trust. So I am not at all interested in for example, repurposing Guantanamo to hold Goldman Sachs, which would be a very good use of that facility. So I have again lost my train of thought. But you have a chance to ask one more convoluted short question.
So I guess talk more about the general strike and what that would look like and how it would happen.
At what point do you want to stop being sodomized? It's up to you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. That wasn't meant for you. I mean, I was actually thinking of a New Zealand officer. Go on.
So twice this evening I've heard reference to Iceland and their plight and their success and what they've done. It almost seems like America would have to come to the same point as Iceland has come to before we could actually get our shit together and have that revolution to correct
or one
the
state
problem. So is it really going to take that? Like, do we really need to hit that collapse, or can we prevent this before we hit that collapse? That collapse is definitely going to happen.
I would love to run for president just because I'm the only guy that doesn't want to be the president.
You're going for president.
And really, I mean, I think there's some ideas here. Coalition cabinet, balanced by, and these should be announced in advance. You should not be eligible on election day if you have not already announced your cabinet and had cabinet level debates, at least for attorney general and defense and state and maybe agriculture, okay? So, I mean, these are obvious things. We're electing personalities, and we're electing personalities whose primary ability is to pretend to agree with you, all of you, okay? Whereas my campaign is about what I was interviewed by On the Issues because they interview all the presidential candidates, and that's a worthy, useful place. But the reality is what I think should not matter as long as I'm committed to making sure that what all of you think is on the table. And none of the presidents today actually give a shit what you think. They only care about who has given them the most money and what they think. And so that's a problem. So I'm worried. I believe the federal government has reached its maximum Peter Principle level. And however many good people are trapped in that bad system, it's a system that is destined to fail in a big, big way. I mean, look at New Orleans, Katrina. Good job, Brownie. Okay? I mean, I was sick to see people on bridges for 4 days. Had I been president, I would have given him my credit card and told every helicopter pilot in the country to get his ass to New Orleans and start popping those people out. How is it that I can think of this and they can't? But we're going to get more and more such disasters. I mean, climate is, of course, a man-made problem. Never mind HARP. Climate is a man-made problem. Paving over the Mississippi, fracking, all of these other things. I believe the solution is going to come from individual states. Vermont, for example, which is rapidly getting to the point where a majority of the legislatures would be willing to vote for secession. Now, I don't particularly recommend secession, but I absolutely do recommend throwing the federal government out of town. No federal ownership of land, and all federal employees have to be registered as agents of a foreign power. So you actually, the states have to get a grip on what they're doing. Yes, sir.
Two questions. The first is back on this collective action, this strike kind of idea. No, but the examples I've heard are all like, they're never going to happen because it involves people doing stuff and people are lazy.
Fastest way to get everybody on the street is to shut down the internet.
But here's another idea, which is something that everybody might really, 50 million people might be really happy to not pay taxes. So if you were organizing some sort of general strike, right, it's like April 15th comes, you don't file taxes, you don't pay taxes. I mean, sometimes a lot of them are taken out of your paycheck, but if 50 million people don't file taxes, the IRS is not going to be able to, it's not going to come close to being able to deal with that issue. And I can't think of a louder message than cutting off the money that
I
people
agree.
pay to the
Cutting
federal
off the
government.
money is
And
huge.
people like to keep their money. So,
Well, and it may be, and again, I'm not smart enough to have all of these answers, but for instance, I like the whole idea of communities moving to an economy that's non-taxable, and basically creating forms of exchange where there is no withholding tax. And I don't know what all the answers are. I mean, see, again, to get 50 million to do this, there's a book by Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson called Cultural Creatives. And so there's at least 50 million smart people in this country, and they generally live in Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and New Hampshire, okay? And there are few in New York, okay? And the problem is nobody has managed to get all of these people to coalesce. We're all just treading water. And this comes back to the whole issue of preconditions of revolution versus a precipitant. Something could happen tomorrow to turn Ed Snowden into a presidential candidate that would just rock, and money would throw through and so forth. Obviously, it's not working for me, okay? But if that happens, then there's a kind of momentum, and you can move forward. I think not paying taxes, I have given serious thought to the whole issue of whether I would pay taxes if I were not unemployed. Because I'm now at a point where I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that the government is borrowing $1 trillion a year in my name, and 50% of the federal government is documented waste. Whether you look at agriculture or energy or health or the military, weapons acquisition, whatever, the numbers are very standard. They're very similar across each mission area. It's between 45 and 55% waste, documented waste. Okay, and I mean, I would at a minimum want to cut that waste. If I cut that waste, I would have the federal budget down to $1.5 trillion a year, which means I not only would not have to borrow $1 trillion a year, which is for corporate and individual welfare, but I would be saving $500 billion a year if I eliminated that waste. I honest to God don't know what the answers are. At some point in time, something, I don't know what, is going to happen. And it is going to change the country overnight. And that's called a precipitant. But I don't know what it will be.
My second question is, I apologize in advance, it's a stupid question. It seems like they've made it harder and harder to own guns or to acquire guns, or there's definitely seems like a little bit of a war on guns. I don't know if I've got that exactly right. But is there any kind of loophole that exists at the federal level or even at a state
There's
level?
no loophole when
where
the
you can-
Supreme Court has been bought and paid for, okay? I mean, we no longer have a Supreme Court in the United States of America. What we have is a bunch of paid lawyers that have been subverted by Justice Powell and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Citizens United was the death of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the fact that Congress didn't come right back and slam that down tells you, I mean, the Congress really became corrupt when Newt Gingrich destroyed Speaker Wright and turned all members of Congress into foot soldiers for their political parties rather than balance of power, Article 1 of the
So there's
Constitution.
no.
No, there's no loophole. What's going to happen?
Is there an easy, are there any methods to get permission to acquire guns?
No,
at
why
a
should you
state
have to
level
ask
or
permission?
anything?
I mean, it's your sacred right. I would even restore gun ownership to felons that serve their time. And the bottom line here is the Constitution has been subverted. And again, I come back to the whole idea for me is bottom up. I mean, oath keepers and getting the police to understand that they're either on your side or they're a target. And that is something that's going to happen one of these days. Yes, sir.
I have like a two-part question. One, this is maybe the easier one, probably not though. What do you what take do you have as a former member of an intelligence apparatus on the assassination of Gerald Bull?
Gerald Bull?
Are you familiar with him?
No.
He's a large gun designer, worked for Canadian military, U.S. military, was involved in HARP, then moved on to working with Iraq.
I believe a lot of people have been killed to get them out of the way, but I have no opinion on this guy.
I think.
Okay, I have no opinion on this guy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's why.
Next question.
I found out. Second, do you know anything about the death of Michael Hastings, the writer, in his car?
Boston Breaks. There's no question that we murder with impunity. I mean, John F. Kennedy was killed by his own government. Martin Luther King was killed by his own government. Senator Tower was probably assassinated. Wellstone, yes, a number of others. And, of course, activists and selected journalists. And Boston Breaks, basically, your car now can have a little thing put on the computer that will allow them to from a nearby car, you have what's called path loss, which a lot of you probably already know about. But if you have another car within a distance, a path loss acceptability distance, you can basically ramp up the speed and shut down brakes. And that's called Boston Breaks. And that may have been used to kill Diana. I don't know myself. But one of the things that troubles me about the FBI is they're not really serious about preventing crime. Because if I were the director of the FBI, one of the things I would be looking at very, very carefully is every single murder of an activist. And I would be plotting patterns. And I would be looking at this stuff. And I would basically be protecting the people rather than protecting the elites, which is what they do. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, welcome back. As far as China getting pushy militarily, they've been pushy economically for a while, and nobody seems to make anything. Also, a little.
Well, we're about to be sidelined economically. I mean, the U.S. is no longer the reserve currency. Russia and China are making their big deals on energy with other currencies. The Chinese have created a new international development bank. Everybody understands that the IMF and the World Bank are corrupt to the bone. This Trans-Pacific thing, I don't know why the president thinks it's going to be signed. He was laughed out of Phnom Penh a while ago. And there's an alternative Asian economic regional cooperation thing that is basically saying we're going to ignore the TPP. So one of the things that I think, we're coming off a boom period. I think we peaked in about 1965. That was back when everybody could look forward to a pension at the end of 20 years and, Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons and the whole bit, it was halcyon days. And the world is just now starting to come to grips with the fact that the United States is toxic. I mean, they've known it to one degree or another, but now there's no longer any financial or cultural or other advantage to letting the U.S. have its way. And so I see the next big boom is in the southern hemisphere. There's a separate internet being built from Vladivostok all the way down, I think the United States is increasingly marginalized. And one of the things that really concerns me is I think our own elites have come to this conclusion. And they're now allowing the United States to be hollowed out. I mean, we're not tending to our seed corn including education and science and technology and engineering and mathematics.
And I meet great Chinese students who really care and they want to go home and make China.
Poverty is a wonderful incentive.
I'm meeting the ones who are well-to-do enough to be studying in the United States, and they're dedicated to improving the environment.
Get closer to the mic.
They're dedicated to learning how to take care of the environment. A lot of the things that we regard as good old-fashioned values, whatever, but they want that for their own country, and they want to go back. They don't want to stay here.
And that's good. I mean, I'm starting to see a lot of Salvadorans go back. I mean, one of the problems is when we invade another country, what we create is an illegal immigration problem. And we've created gangs. Exactly. I mean, my second book, The New Craft of Intelligence, has this whole thing on how immigration pressure is coming up. I mean, the whole point of a good foreign policy is to keep them there, okay? And I mean that in the nicest possible way. But in fact, we support 42 of the 44 dictators on the planet. Okay? North Korea and Cuba are the only two that we don't really like. And frankly, I love Cuba because I want to go visit Hemingway's house. And Cuba also has the only sustainable agriculture in the Western Hemisphere because we deprived them of Monsanto and all the pesticides and Roundup and all of this.
What did your old buddies think of? But there are bums.
Well, part of the problem is, again, you have an industrial era hierarchical government that thinks it's efficient to deal with a dictator. Ambassador Mark Palmer has written an excellent book called Breaking the Real Axis of Evil. And it's a plan for wiping out all 44 of the dictators. And essentially what it boils down to is if I were restructuring state and defense, you would have an assistant secretary, you would have an undersecretary for democracy, real democracy, not what we call democracy, which is do it our way. You would have an assistant secretary for those who agree to a 5-year buyout plan and an assistant secretary for those who don't. And then over at defense, you would have, again, the same thing. But we're not serious about democracy. All we want is to get our economic agreements that favor the 1% in both countries over the 99% in both countries. And the reason the TPP has so many secret parts to it is because every single one of those secret parts is fuck you very much, okay? And that's criminal. Secret agreements should not be allowed. Yes, sir.
How important do you think the Sunni-Shia conflict is in the world? And do you think that Obama growing up in a Sunni country has something to do with our foreign policy?
Well, first off, I'm told Dick Cheney did not understand that invading Iraq would unleash the Shiites. I mean, Iran played us like a fiddle, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think the Sunni-Shiite conflict is very important, and one of the big problems we have right now is that Saudi Arabia is fucking us again. They funded Wahhabism in the 1980s, and Saudi Arabia is now funding anti-Shia activities, and they're getting really, really serious about spending a lot of money on militant groups that kill Shiites. Now, I went to Lehigh University with some Iranians, and every single one of those guys was smart enough to be in this room. And I have a lot of respect for the Iranian Persian culture. One of the problems that we have with our foreign policy mechanism is it's very uninformed and ideologically rooted, and we basically create our own problems. One of the most popular maps on my website is the map of the Shiites and the Sunnis worldwide and their distribution. And one of the things I don't think a lot of people understand is that the reason Iran wants the nuclear bomb is because Pakistan has the Sunni nuclear bomb. They don't want the nuclear bomb for us. They want it for Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And so this is a really big deal. And I don't have all the answers, but I think it's something that we really need to understand. And what I have found in my experience is that cultural conflicts, I mean, look at how well India has done. We no longer have the Sikhs killing the Hindus and vice versa. And so it is possible to govern toward peace. And I think the Sunni-Shiite conflict needs to be governed on the basis of a solid economic and social foundation. But that's not what Saudi Arabia wants. That's not what Qatar and the United Arab Republic want. Those are three festering cancers in the Middle East and North Africa. And the United States government seems to be totally, totally comfortable with ignoring that cancer. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. First off, do you think any of the involved parties were morally or practically right in the Clive and Bundy affair?
In the what?
The Clive and Bundy affair, when all those ranchers out in Nevada.
Oh, that was fun.
That.
That was fun. Number one, that was about Senator Reid fucking over the public and selling some land to the Chinese for a solar thing. That was not about clearing the cattle. What was really interesting about that was the speed with which information mobilized public support. Now, I think Bundy has his own flaws, and there are obviously issues there. But what that taught me was we need to throw the federal government off all land west of the Mississippi. The federal government should not be allowed to own land, period.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes.
So at first glance, it appears that the ranchers and such may have gotten their way. How would you draw parallels or contrast between an opposition like that versus the protests in Zuccotti Park, which got broken up and went away?
Well, one group was armed and the other one wasn't. But you know, but Zuccotti Park could have been different if they had been more focused. I mean, Occupy was for a momentary period of time an inspiration to the world, not just to the United States of America, and they blew it. So I absolutely believe that citizens should be armed and dangerous. And I believe that it's very, very important that law enforcement be hired and evaluated and constantly reminded that they work for the locality, and that if they ever federalize, we will kill them. Because that is the single greatest threat to the public, is the idea that everybody will become a SWAT team. If I were president today, I would be canceling all these SWAT teams. I mean, it used to be that 2 detectives with balls could make an arrest. And now you've got fucking helicopters. This is insane. It's an abuse of the dollar. It's an abuse of the citizen. And they're making mistakes. Their intelligence sucks. Okay, anything else?
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Has anyone not asked a question? How about first timers first? Come on, let him up. Yeah. And then we'll do the repeaters. Okay.
Hi, Robert. Thank you for doing this. I spent some time early this year studying about countering financing of terrorism. And to me, it seemed like...
Is that the Goldman Sachs version of financing terrorism or the Halawa version of financing terrorism?
Both. And I kind of found that fighting terrorism at that stage is probably going to be the most effective way of getting rid of it, because you nip it in the bud. That's the only thing that I've found that would work a lot better than spending trillions of dollars on, going and fighting wars and killing so many people and pissing off half the world.
Yeah, but no one cares about doing it better, okay? I mean, we invaded Iraq because Dick Cheney wanted to make a shitload of money. And one of the things that I've learned is we've created all these terrorists. I actually didn't understand until about 10 years ago. The reason we go to war so much is because war is very, very profitable for a concentrated segment of society. In fact, peace is 100 times more profitable than war, but it's spread out over the 99%. And the 99% is not mobilized to demand peace, okay? I mean, one of the cool things about the APT tax is that the rate is set by the public, not by the government. which means if you want to go to war, you not only have to get Congress to agree to it, you have to get the public to agree to raise the tax to pay for the war. All right, and I also believe we have to restore the universal draft, and I want a mid-career draft as well. I really believe in the soundness of the military as a socializing institution. So from my point of view, I got thrown off Fox News early on because I said the war on terrorism is a fraud. It is a fraud. I mean, we're the terrorists when you get right down to it. And so I certainly believe in frustrating Saudi Arabia in funding terrorism. And I certainly believe that we should not be paying for fascists around the world. But at the same time, I believe we should be doing much, much more to encourage democratic, equal societies where creating a prosperous world at peace is not an ideal, it's actually an essential. Otherwise, we keep eating us, it's like you drop enough rats into the aquarium, they start eating each other. So controlling the funding of terrorism requires integrity, and we don't have that. Okay. If we had integrity, we would be all over Israel and Saudi Arabia.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, you guys sort yourselves out, but in general, I want to give preference to people who have not asked a question.
I'm sorry to cut in front of you guys. I'll only say this once, and I know you get mad when I
Thank
say
you,
this
and
to
then
you.
we can do alternatives. Okay, go on.
I'll only say this once, and you get mad. I want to thank you for your service.
Oh, bullshit.
I know. That I won't say it again.
Okay.
And I'm only going to ask this question because you brought it up first. You mentioned JFK. Let's hear your JFK stories and your JFK.
Well, I've reviewed about 16 books and DVDs on JFK. And so one, you can read my summaries of all of those books. I mean, the obvious thing is the Warren Commission was a cover-up. Lyndon Johnson provided the story. And the FBI, which was founded by a pedophile, was a full partner in that. Now, one of the interesting things is that it's come to light that George Bush Sr. and who's that Israeli leader? Rabin and George Bush Sr. were both in Dallas on the day. Bush Sr. was in Dallas, and so was Rabin. And basically what I think happened, well, first off, Bobby Kennedy warned JFK the morning of the assassination that there was an assassination plot, and JFK put his faith in the Secret Service, which had been subverted. Okay, they basically pulled back, and so did the Dallas cops. I mean, Kennedy created for himself the perfect storm. He pissed off the Israelis by clamping down on CIA smuggling of nuclear materials through Mexico to Israel. So he was stopping the Israeli nuclear program. He had fired the general who was the brother of the Dallas police chief. Bobby Kennedy was all over Hoover, and Hoover was pissed. There were issues with the Cuban criminal gangs based in New Orleans, and CIA, which had set up Kennedy. Bay of Pigs was never, ever going to be a success, and they basically screwed him. And then let the Cuban exiles think that it was JFK that subverted the whole thing. So you had a whole bunch of pissed off Cuban. You know, it's tough being president, and Kennedy was betrayed by his own people. But the bottom line is, a lot of people, including Texas Energy and New York Money, were mad at him, and they decided to assassinate him. And when they got away with it, what that basically did was turn every subsequent president into a neutered gerbil. And I'm told that Jimmy Carter cried his heart out when he realized this one day in the White House. So we essentially subverted the executive, beginning with the assassination of Kennedy. And then when Newt Gingrich subverted the Congress and Justice Powell subverted the Supreme Court, we've essentially lost all three of our essential government institutions. They are no longer the institutions that have integrity as our founders in the Constitution intended. We now have three monstrosities that are out of control. And I don't know what to do about it. Yes, sir.
So, just out of curiosity, do you know what the current state of electrogravitics is?
Of what?
At this point? Electrogravitics or anti-gravity or any of that? Because there was a flurry of activity that was going on in the 50s and the 60s with Townsend Brown and others. And I
Shall
know
we
that-
go into the UFO and alien stuff?
Well, I'm just curious because I know.
I think that's a yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I know NASA was.
Is it
working on
almost 2 a.m.?
Boeing was.
All right, I'll stay as long as there's a modest crowd. All right, all right, fine, let's do aliens. One of the things that was really fun for me was there was this congressional testimony. It was actually a funded event, and the former defense minister of Canada, was paid to be a witness, and a congressman was paid to be the putative chairman of this hearing and so forth. But one of the things that came out of this was that there are at least 5 alien species that we are allegedly in touch with through a government outside of government. I think there are some elements of the U.S. government that keep the president and Congress completely in the dark with respect to what they're doing. And I believe that the $2.2 trillion that Rumsfeld could not account for, a lot of that money was spent on underground cities and alien technologies and stuff like that. The bottom... Well, Cynthia McKinney was beating the crap out of him the day before. Now, look, to give Rumsfeld credit, it's possible that he's perfectly stupid and had no knowledge. No. Let's not go there, okay? But the bottom line is there are at least 100 planets capable of intelligent life, and I've got to believe we're the least intelligent among all of these. And I do believe that there is extraterrestrial intelligence. I do believe that they're smart enough to be worried about us. I do believe that we have acquired some technologies and that we have repressed many technologies, both alien and non-alien. Tesla is a good example of a technology that was killed because it impacted on legacy interests, okay? I don't know what the status is, but I have been told by people I trust that we have, in fact, created anti-gravity vehicles, and we have, in fact, created clean stealth vehicles, as opposed to the crap that we have with the F-35, which is kind of like a retard version of alien technology. And so, you know, to the extent that I think about aliens, I just hope that they will understand that there is intelligence life on Earth. So
one other question. Dr. Mary's monkey, is there any credence to the fact that CIA was weaponizing cancer for killing Castro?
Or Hugo Chavez.
Yeah.
I have no direct knowledge, but I have posted on 7 CIAs. And one of the problems that we have with our government bureaucracies, especially some of them that are in the national security area, is that the Dulles brothers were very naive. And of course, we imported a number of Nazis. We also captured all of the gold in the Philippines. There's a book called Gold Warriors, and we created the Black Lily Trust, rooted in the Secretary of the Treasury. And so for many years after World War II, we were actually funding the reinstatement of fascists in Germany, Japan, and Italy through CIA covert programs with Nazi managers that we had brought back in. We also facilitated the escape of many Nazis with a great deal of money to Argentina. And so there is a Nazi Hydra. There is also a Rothschild Rockefeller Hydra. And there's a pedophile Hydra, okay? And I think these people recruit their successors from generation to generation. And one of the things I've learned in the past 10 years is that if I were ever DNI, my first priority would be counterintelligence. We have got to clean house because we have got religious and ideological and financial and pervert traitors in the United States government at every level. And we have got to get those people out of there. And we have got to start making decisions based on evidence rather than these other agendas.
Okay, and last question. Why did we go back to, well, I mean, I know we went back to Afghanistan ostensibly for 9/11, but, I mean, the drug trade that immediately was gone, and then now we've got heroin production.
Wall Street was having a liquidity problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, and now that heroin production is at record levels yet again.
You know, you got to give the Taliban credit. They stopped the drug production.
They did.
And I am not, I mean, I agree with the Taliban on several key points, including that I was the only analyst in Afghanistan beginning in September 2013 who was telling my colonel that the BSA would not be signed. And he looked at me like I was an alien. And then later he started to look at me in more evil ways, because it was absolutely, totally against what the State Department was saying. It was totally against what General Dunford's people were saying. And there were no computers involved in my thinking. I was actually reading, and I started to see the comparison between the Treaty of Gandamak, which is where Afghanistan became a colony of the British, and the what's that D line, the Pakistani line, starts with a D. Khyber Pass, Durand Line, the Durand Line. Okay, the Durand Line is an abomination. And there's a wonderful book called The Health of Nations, Society and Law. And it's written by a Cambridge professor, and it talks about how all the artificial borders that the European colonial powers have imposed essentially overturned centuries of tribal accommodations with one another and with nature. So the BSA was being perceived by a large part of Afghan society as the equivalent of the Treaty of Gandamak. And there's also the whole issue of the international donor money. And Ghani, in his book, Fixing Failed States, made this point, and he's made this point effectively in many YouTubes. 80 to 90% of the international donor money never gets to Afghanistan. Basically, a New York $1 billion donation is then outsourced to a nonprofit in the UK, which takes 20% off the top, and then it outsources it to a nonprofit in Turkey, which takes 20% off the top, and then they outsource it to another nonprofit. And by the time you get down there, that $1 billion is turned into at best $100 million worth of shit delivered badly. And so that's one of the things I think the information revolution is going to make possible. I have a global range of gifts table concept where you can actually get down to a person needs a spare part for a Romanian engine from the 1950s, and a guy can make it with a lathe, and a German will pay for the FedEx, and someone else will deliver it, and you're getting to direct assistance there with zero resistance, zero corruption. We go to war to make money for a select group of people. We also go to war to employ a whole bunch of pissed off young people who have no jobs. And I recommend the video, Why We Fight. I recommend the video, The Good Soldier. There were some very heartrending videos of young men being interviewed in Iraq, and one of them was saying, society has no use for us. This is all we can do. And that's wrong. That's wrong. And I mean, we have 75,000 amputees in this country, okay? We have over 300,000 disabled veterans. We have mental diseases out the ass. And the VA response is to drug them up and put them back on the street. Now, I don't fault the VA. The fact is, we went to war without understanding what the true costs would be. We've also improved battlefield medicine to the point that we now have a 16-to-1 survival ratio instead of a 4-to-1 survival ratio. But we didn't do the back office stuff. And so basically we can save them and save them while they lose their limbs, but then we can't reconstitute them once they're home. That's exactly. Well, that's right. That's right. And again, that's an example of true cost economics. Okay, we're just not creating a society. Go on, sir.
I know I asked a question before. And
that's all right.
You might have seen my face in previous cons. I don't.
I have no memory.
I don't feel you're discriminating against me by asking questions before, but anyways, digressing. You talked about the subversion of basically the three main areas of the United States government. I was watching the World Cup and not doing my job for a good portion of the last several weeks.
I too, except I missed the German game. Shit!
So I was
7 goals.
I was in some bars for some of them, and that was just egregious. But I also was watching on Vice News and other media about what's happening in Brazil. And I guess the question is, are there any sort of successful, not, revolutions may be the right word, but you know, what's happening there, and is that telling of the future?
Sadly, I'm not as informed as I'd like to be. For instance, I had to come here to find out that there's a province in Mexico where you're not allowed to own land. I mean, that's way cool. And the French are similar, and that's good. The Porto Alegre and the whole participatory budgeting thing was a brief shining moment in Brazilian history that was rapidly repressed. And one of the things, if I had the open source everything hub, one of the things I would be doing is creating the public intelligence network. And I would be scouring the world for examples like this of what works. Right now, what works is being kept secret.
Yeah.
And the last thing CNN money wants to cover is success stories that aren't directly associated with fraud based in New York. So I'm very excited by the potential of finding and promulgating success stories. But I don't know of any myself. I mean, Singapore is a success story in its own right, and Lee Kuan Yew has done a great job there, but Singapore also has its limits. They really think that they can forecast the future rather than create the future. And part of true cost economics is creating the future rather than trying to forecast what all the other morons are going to do.
Which seems like that's all what's happening right now.
Yeah.
In this part of the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yes, sir.